If you had asked me a year ago, I would have said that my partner, James, and I had a solid relationship. We didn't argue often, we supported each other's goals, and we had what I thought was a strong foundation of trust and respect. So, when he first suggested I think about changing jobs, I didn't see it for what it really was, the spark that would ignite a firestorm in our relationship. It started innocently enough. One night, after a particularly grueling day at work, I was venting to James about my boss's endless demands and my coworkers' lack of teamwork. He listened patiently, nodding along as I recounted the latest frustrations. "Have you ever thought about looking for something else?" he asked when I finally paused to take a sip of wine. I blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're always stressed, and it doesn't seem like you're happy there," he said carefully. "Maybe it's time to find a job that's a better fit." It wasn't an unreasonable suggestion, but something about the way he said it put me on edge. "I've put a lot of time into this job," I said, more defensively than I intended. "I can't just walk away." "I know," James said quickly. "I'm just saying, it might be worth considering. That's all." I nodded, but the conversation left a sour taste in my mouth. Over the next few weeks, James brought up the idea more frequently. Sometimes it was in response to my complaints about work, other times, it felt like he was planting seeds in casual conversation. "I saw a job posting today that made me think of you," he said one morning over breakfast. "Really?" I asked, trying to sound neutral. "Yeah," he said, pulling out his phone to show me. "It's with a company that has a great reputation, and the role seems like it would align with your skills." I glanced at the listing and forced a smile. "I'll think about it." But I didn't think about it. At least, not in the way James wanted me to. Instead, I started wondering why he was so eager for me to leave my job. Was it really about my happiness, or was there something else going on? The tension came to a head one evening when James casually mentioned another job opportunity over dinner. "Okay, what's going on?" I asked, setting my fork down. "What do you mean?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "You keep bringing up new jobs for me," I said. "Are you trying to tell me something? Do you think I'm bad at my job?" "Of course not," he said, looking genuinely surprised. "I just hate seeing you so stressed all the time. I thought maybe a change would help." "Well, it's not that simple," I said, my frustration boiling over. "You can't just decide I need a new job and expect me to drop everything." "I'm not deciding anything," he said, his tone growing defensive. "I'm just trying to help." "Well, it doesn't feel like help," I snapped. The rest of the dinner was spent in icy silence. After that argument, things between us felt strained. I started questioning everything, James's motives, my own feelings about work, and whether I was being too stubborn or too sensitive. Was James right? Was I clinging to a job that no longer served me because I was afraid of change? Or was he pushing me for reasons he wasn't being honest about? At work, I found myself scrutinizing every interaction, trying to decide if James's assessment of my stress was accurate. Was I really as unhappy as he thought I was? At home, I started pulling away from him, unsure of how to address the growing rift between us. One evening, as I was scrolling through emails, I noticed one from a recruitment agency with the subject line, "Exciting opportunities in your field." Normally, I would have deleted it without a second thought, but something made me pause. Out of curiosity, I clicked the link and started browsing the job listings. To my surprise, I found a role that sounded genuinely intriguing, challenging but exciting, with a company that had a reputation for valuing its employees. I bookmarked the page, my heart racing as I considered the possibility. The next morning, as I was getting ready for work, James approached me with an apologetic expression. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Sure," I said, bracing myself. "I've been thinking about our argument," he began. "And I realized I haven't been completely honest with you." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I've been pushing you to think about changing jobs because I've been thinking about a change too," he said. "I got offered a position in another city, and I didn't know how to bring it up without upsetting you." His words hit me like a freight train. "You're thinking about moving?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't accepted the offer yet," he said quickly. "I wanted to talk to you about it first. But I thought if you found a job you loved somewhere else, it might make the decision easier." I stared at him, the pieces clicking into place. His suggestion wasn't just about my happiness, it was about his own plans and the future he envisioned for us. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus on anything but James's revelation. The idea of leaving my job and starting over in a new city was daunting, but the thought of staying behind while he pursued this opportunity was even harder to bear. When I got home that evening, I found James sitting on the couch, looking as conflicted as I felt. "I don't want to make this decision without you," he said. "But I also don't want to hold you back." His words hung in the air, and for the first time, I realized that this wasn't just about my job or his, it was about what kind of life we wanted to build together. The days that followed James's confession were some of the most confusing and emotional of my life. The job offer he'd received wasn't just in another city, it was in another state, far from everything I knew and loved. The thought of uprooting my life, leaving my friends, my job, and the familiarity of home, felt overwhelming. But the alternative, staying behind while James pursued his dreams alone, was a future I didn't want to imagine. The tension between us was palpable, though we both tried to act like everything was normal. In the quiet moments, when we weren't distracted by work or errands, the silence stretched between us like a chasm. I confided in my best friend, Emily, hoping for some clarity. We met for coffee at our usual spot, the comforting hum of the cafe providing a small reprieve from the chaos in my mind. "What do you think I should do?" I asked, stirring my latte absently. Emily leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "It sounds like you're being asked to choose between two really big parts of your life," she said. "Your career and your relationship." "But that's not fair," I said, frustration bubbling to the surface. "Why do I have to be the one to sacrifice?" "You don't," she said gently. "But relationships are about compromise. Maybe the real question is, what do you want your life to look like? And does that vision include James?" Her words stayed with me long after we parted ways. That evening, James and I sat down for dinner, both of us picking at our food in silence. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Do you even care what I want?" I blurted out, my voice trembling. James looked up, startled. "What are you talking about? You've been pushing me to think about changing jobs, moving, starting over. Did you ever stop to think about how that might feel for me?" "Of course I care," he said, his tone defensive. "But this isn't just about you, Caroline. This is about us." "Is it?" I asked, the anger bubbling over. "Because right now, it feels like it's all about you and your plans." James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't want it to feel like that," he said. I thought if you found a job you were excited about, it might make the idea of moving less scary." "Well, it didn't," I snapped. "It just made me feel like my career doesn't matter to you." "That's not true," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I just don't want to lose you, Caroline. And I don't know how to make this work if we're not on the same page." After our argument, I retreated to the bedroom, needing space to think. As I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, my mind raced with memories of our relationship, the highs, the lows, and all the moments in between. I thought about the time James stayed up all night helping me prepare for a big presentation at work, the way he surprised me with my favorite takeout after a tough day, and the quiet, steady way he always supported me when I doubted myself. But I also thought about how I'd let my career become my identity, how I'd ignored the ways we'd been drifting apart as we each focused on our individual goals. For the first time, I realized that this wasn't just about a job or a move, it was about what kind of future we wanted to build together. The next day, I decided to take a more proactive approach. Instead of dwelling on what I might lose, I started researching opportunities in the city where James's potential new job was located. To my surprise, I found a few roles that seemed promising, positions that aligned with my skills and even offered growth opportunities one hadn't considered before. That evening, I showed James what I'd found. "I'm not saying I'm ready to move," I said carefully. "But I think we need to explore all our options, together." James's face softened, and for the first time in days, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly. A few weeks later, we decided to visit the city where James's potential job was located. It was a whirlwind trip, touring neighborhoods, checking out apartments, and even meeting with a few recruiters who were interested in my resume. By the end of the weekend, I felt a mix of emotions. The city had its charm, and the job prospects were better than I'd expected. But leaving home still felt like a monumental leap. As we drove back, James reached over and took my hand. "I know this isn't easy for you," he said. "And I just want you to know, whatever you decide, I'm here." Back home, we sat down together to talk through what we'd learned from the trip. Instead of framing the decision as a binary choice, stay or go, we explored ways to make the transition feel more manageable. "What if we try it for a year?" James suggested. "If it doesn't work out, we can always come back." "And if it does work out?" I asked. "Then we'll know we made the right choice," he said. The idea of a trial period made the decision feel less daunting, and for the first time, I felt like we were approaching this as a team. A few weeks later, I accepted a job offer in the new city. It wasn't the easiest decision, but it felt like the right one, not because I was giving up my career, but because I was choosing to redefine what my career and my relationship could look like together. As I packed up my office and said goodbye to my coworkers, I felt a strange mix of sadness and excitement. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew this was the first step toward building it. The day we moved was a blur of boxes, goodbyes, and the sound of our car tires humming against the highway. I stared out the window for most of the drive, watching the familiar landscape fade into something new. James was quiet, occasionally glancing at me as if trying to gauge my mood. "You okay?" he asked at one point, breaking the silence. "I think so," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. Starting over felt like stepping into the unknown, a mix of excitement and fear that sat heavy in my chest. When we arrived at our new apartment, it was smaller than I'd imagined, with creaky floors and an outdated kitchen. James immediately started unpacking, his optimism unshaken. "This place has potential," he said, holding up a set of curtains he'd picked out. I smiled faintly, appreciating his effort but struggling to share his enthusiasm. My mind was still on everything we'd left behind, my old job, our favorite coffee shop, the friends who had been like family. My first day at the new job was nerve-wracking. The office was sleek and modern, filled with strangers who smiled politely but didn't go out of their way to include me. I spent most of the day at my desk, trying to familiarize myself with the company's systems while battling the nagging feeling that I didn't belong. When I got home, James was waiting with takeout and a hopeful expression. "How was it?" he asked. "It was fine," I said, though my tone betrayed my uncertainty. He didn't press, instead handing me a plate and sitting beside me on the couch. "We'll figure this out," he said softly. As the weeks went on, the stress of starting over began to take its toll. James was thriving in his new role, coming home each day with stories of exciting projects and supportive colleagues. I was happy for him, but I couldn't ignore the growing resentment I felt. My own job was fine, stable, decent pay, good benefits, but it lacked the sense of purpose and camaraderie I'd had at my old company. One evening, as we were eating dinner, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Do you ever think about what we gave up to come here?" I asked. James looked up, surprised. "I think about it," he said. "But I also think about what we've gained." "What have we gained?" I asked, my frustration spilling over. Because right now, it feels like all I've done is sacrifice. James set down his fork, his expression serious. I didn't ask you to sacrifice anything, Caroline. I thought we were making this decision together. We did, I said, my voice trembling. But it doesn't feel like we're in this together. It feels like I'm just following you. That night, we sat down for the first honest conversation we'd had in weeks. I didn't realize how hard this has been for you, James admitted. I've been so focused on my own adjustment that I haven't been paying attention to yours. And I haven't been honest about how I'm feeling, I said. I've been holding it in because I didn't want to ruin this for you. You're not ruining anything, he said. But I need to know when you're struggling so we can figure it out together. For the first time since the move, I felt like we were back on the same team. The next day, I decided to make a conscious effort to engage more at work. I started joining colleagues for lunch, volunteering for projects, and even attending an after-hours networking event. Slowly but surely, I began to feel more comfortable. James noticed the change almost immediately. You seem happier, he said one evening as we cooked dinner together. I think I am, I admitted. It's not perfect, but it's getting better. As I found my footing in the new city, James and I also made an effort to reconnect. We explored local restaurants, took long walks in the park, and even signed up for a cooking class together. One evening, as we sat on the balcony with glasses of wine, James turned to me with a thoughtful expression. Do you regret moving? He asked. I thought about it for a moment before shaking my head. No, I said. It's been hard, but I think we're stronger for it. He smiled, reaching for my hand. I think so too. A few months later, we returned to our old city for a friend's wedding. It was bittersweet, seeing the places and people we'd left behind. As we drove past my old office, I felt a pang of nostalgia but also a sense of closure. I realized that while I missed parts of my old life, I didn't regret the decision to leave. This feels different now, I said as we pulled into the driveway of our friend's house. What do you mean? James asked. I mean, it doesn't feel like home anymore, I said. Not in the way it used to. James nodded, a soft smile on his face. Maybe that's because we're building a new home, he said. By the time we returned to our new city, I felt a renewed sense of purpose, not just in my career, but in my relationship with James. We weren't the same people we'd been before the move, and our relationship wasn't the same either. But in many ways, that was a good thing. We'd learned to communicate more openly, to support each other more intentionally, and to navigate challenges as a team. As we unpacked our bags and settled back into our apartment, James turned to me with a smile. Thanks for taking this leap with me, he said. Thanks for catching me, I replied. The weeks after our return from the wedding felt like a turning point. Something had shifted, not just in how we viewed our decision to move, but in how we approached our relationship. For the first time in months, it felt like we were truly on the same page. James had always been optimistic, but now I could feel his optimism rubbing off on me. I wasn't just tolerating the new city anymore, I was starting to embrace it. My work environment felt less foreign, our apartment began to feel like home, and the sense of isolation I'd felt after the move started to fade. But even as things improved, I knew that building a new life together required more than just settling into routines. It meant creating something meaningful, something we could both feel proud of. James and I decided to focus on building connections in our new city. We started attending local events, street fairs, art shows, and even a quirky trivia night at a nearby bar. Through these outings, we met people who shared our interests, and slowly, our social circle began to grow. One evening, as we hosted our first small dinner party in the apartment, I looked around the room and realized how far we'd come. Laughter filled the space, the scent of homemade lasagna wafted through the air, and for the first time since the move, I felt like we truly belonged. While our social life flourished, James and I also worked on finding balance in our personal and professional lives. His new job was demanding, and there were nights when he came home exhausted, his mind still spinning with work-related stress. "Maybe I shouldn't have taken this job," he admitted one night as we sat on the couch, his head in his hands. "Don't say that," I said, reaching for his hand. "This is what you wanted. It's okay to feel overwhelmed sometimes." "But what if I made the wrong choice?" he asked, his voice heavy with doubt. I squeezed his hand, meeting his gaze. "Then we'll figure it out together," I said. "Just like we always do." That conversation reminded me of how far we'd come, not just in rebuilding our relationship, but in learning to support each other through uncertainty. One of the most important lessons we learned was the value of finding joy in the small moments. On weekends, we started exploring the city together, discovering hidden gems like a cozy bookstore tucked into a side street or a cafe with the best chai lattes I'd ever tasted. One rainy afternoon, we stumbled upon a pottery studio offering walk-in classes. We spent hours there, laughing as we tried, and failed, to create bowls that didn't wobble. "I don't think this one's going to make it to the kiln," James said, holding up a misshapen lump of clay. "Speak for yourself," I teased, admiring my own equally lopsided creation. Those moments of shared laughter and connection became the foundation of our new life together. Despite the progress we'd made, there were still challenges to navigate. The move hadn't erased the differences in our personalities or the way we processed stress. There were nights when I felt the old doubts creeping in, questioning whether I'd truly found my place in this new city, or if I ever would. During one of our therapy sessions, I shared these fears with our counselor. "I'm afraid that if I don't fully settle here, it'll feel like I've failed, not just myself, but James too," I admitted. Our counselor nodded thoughtfully. "Settling doesn't have to mean loving every aspect of your new life," she said. "It means finding peace with where you are and focusing on what you're building. That takes time, and that's okay." Her words resonated with both of us, reminding us that growth was a process, not a destination. A few months later, I was offered a promotion at work, one that came with increased responsibility and the chance to lead a team. It was a role I hadn't anticipated but felt ready for, thanks to the confidence I'd gained since the move. When I told James, his face lit up with pride. "I knew they'd see how talented you are," he said, pulling me into a hug. His support meant the world to me, and it reinforced what I already knew, that this move, as difficult as it had been, had opened doors I might never have considered otherwise. One weekend, we invited Emily and a few other friends from our old city to visit. It was the first time they'd seen our new home, and I was nervous about how they'd react. "This place is amazing," Emily said as she looked around the apartment. "You guys have really made it your own." Hearing her say that felt like validation, not just of our decision to move, but of the life we were creating. As we showed our friends around the city, I realized how much my perspective had shifted. The streets that once felt unfamiliar now felt like home, and the opportunities that once seemed daunting now felt like stepping stones to something greater. By the end of our first year in the new city, James and I had found a rhythm that worked for us. We weren't the same people we'd been before the move, and our relationship wasn't the same either. But in many ways, it was stronger, rooted in honesty, compromise, and a shared commitment to building a life we both loved. One evening, as we watched the sunset from our balcony, James turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think we'll ever stop missing the old city?" he asked. "Probably not," I said. "But I don't think we're supposed to. Missing it means it mattered. But that doesn't mean we can't love what we're building here too." He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "I'm glad we took this leap," he said. "Me too," I replied. And in that moment, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, for the challenges we'd faced, the lessons we'd learned, and the life we were creating together. By the time we marked a year in our new city, the challenges we'd faced felt like distant memories. The arguments, the doubts, and the rocky adjustment period had been replaced with something deeper, a sense of accomplishment and pride in what we'd built together. We weren't just surviving anymore, we were thriving. Our relationship had grown stronger, not in spite of the move, but because of it. And in the process, I'd found a version of myself I didn't know existed, someone who could adapt, take risks, and find joy in the unexpected. To celebrate our one-year anniversary in the city, James surprised me with a weekend getaway to a nearby lake. The cabin he'd booked was cozy and charming, surrounded by tall pines and the gentle sound of lapping water. As we unpacked our bags, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. "This is perfect," I said, leaning into him. "I wanted to do something to celebrate how far we've come," he said. That evening, as we sat by the fire with glasses of wine, we reflected on the past year, the highs, the lows, and everything in between. "I didn't think we'd make it through those first few months," I admitted. "There were times when I wasn't sure if I'd made the right choice." "Me too," James said, surprising me. "But I think the hard times taught us how to really communicate. We're better now because of it." One of the biggest lessons we'd learned was the importance of balance. Before the move, we'd both been so focused on our careers that we'd let other parts of our lives fall by the wayside. But in the new city, we'd made a conscious effort to prioritize the things that truly mattered. We started taking weekend hikes, exploring nearby trails and reconnecting with nature. We also made time for date nights, trying new restaurants and revisiting favorite spots that had become part of our routine. Those moments weren't just about having fun, they were about reinforcing the bond we'd worked so hard to rebuild. My promotion turned out to be a turning point in my career. Leading a team was challenging, but it was also deeply rewarding. For the first time, I felt like I was in a role that aligned with my skills and passions. James was equally successful in his new job, though he remained humble about his achievements. One evening, as we were cooking dinner, I caught him smiling to himself. "What's that grin about?" I asked, nudging him playfully. "I got a shout-out in today's team meeting," he said. "Apparently, my project exceeded expectations." "That's amazing," I said, beaming with pride. "Thanks," he said, his smile growing. "But honestly, I wouldn't have gotten here without you." Another unexpected blessing of the move was the friendships we'd formed. Our neighbors had become close friends, and our growing social circle brought a sense of community that made the city feel more like home. One evening, we hosted a game night at our apartment, filling the space with laughter and friendly competition. As I watched James banter with our friends, I felt a deep sense of contentment. "This feels good, doesn't it?" he said later, as we cleaned up the aftermath of the evening. "It does," I agreed. "It feels like home." As the year came to a close, I took some time to reflect on how much I'd grown. The person I was a year ago, unsure, resistant to change, and scared of the unknown, felt like a distant memory. Moving had forced me to confront my fears and step outside my comfort zone. It had challenged me to communicate more openly with James, to take ownership of my choices, and to find strength in the face of uncertainty. Those lessons weren't just about the move, they were about life. And for that, I was grateful. One evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, James turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Where do you see us in 5 years?" he asked. I smiled, considering the question. "Happy," I said simply. "Wherever we are, I just want us to keep growing and supporting each other." "Me too," he said, taking my hand. "And for what it's worth, I think we're off to a pretty good start." Looking back, I realized that the move wasn't just a change of scenery, it was a turning point in our relationship and our lives. It had tested us in ways we hadn't anticipated, but it had also brought us closer together and shown us what we were capable of as a team. We weren't perfect, but we didn't need to be. What mattered was that we were committed to each other, to our growth, and to the life we were building, together. By the time we entered our second year in the new city, the life James and I had built felt like a living, breathing testament to everything we'd overcome. The arguments and doubts that had once seemed insurmountable were now distant memories, replaced by a shared vision for our future. For the first time in years, I felt like we weren't just reacting to life, we were actively shaping it, together. It all started with an offhand comment during one of our evening walks. We were strolling through a quiet neighborhood, admiring the houses and speculating about the lives of the people who lived there. "Do you ever think about owning a home?" James asked, his tone casual. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But it always felt so far off, like something for a different version of us." "What if it's not that far off?" he said, stopping to look at me. "What if we made it a goal?" The idea caught me off guard. For so long, we'd been focused on adapting to the move and finding our footing in the new city. The thought of planning something as big as buying a house felt almost surreal, but also exciting. "Maybe," I said, smiling at him. "It's definitely something to think about." Over the next few weeks, James and I started talking more seriously about our long-term goals. It wasn't just about buying a house, it was about envisioning the kind of life we wanted to build together. We made lists, pored over online listings, and even started a small savings plan dedicated to our future home. The process wasn't just practical, it was deeply bonding, a reminder that we were a team working towards something bigger than ourselves. As excited as we were about the idea of buying a house, we knew it wouldn't happen overnight. Balancing our dreams with the realities of our day-to-day lives required patience and perspective. At work, I was thriving in my new role, though the increased responsibilities sometimes left me feeling stretched thin. James was equally busy, his projects at work demanding long hours and intense focus. But instead of letting those challenges pull us apart, we found ways to support each other. Some nights, that meant James bringing home dinner so I didn't have to cook. Other nights, it meant me helping him brainstorm ideas for a tricky presentation. Those small acts of care reminded us that even in the busiest seasons, we could still prioritize each other. One weekend, while cleaning out our storage closet, I stumbled upon a box of old photos and mementos from our time in the old city. As I flipped through the pictures, memories came rushing back, our favorite coffee shop, the park where we used to take walks, and the apartment where we'd shared so many late-night conversations. When James came into the room, I held up one of the photos. "Do you miss it?" I asked. "Sometimes," he said, sitting beside me. "But I think I miss the idea of it more than the reality. The truth is, I love where we are now." "Me too," I said, leaning against him. That moment felt like a turning point, a quiet acknowledgement that while the past was an important part of our story, it didn't define our future. As part of our effort to stay connected and focused on our goals, James and I started a new tradition, monthly check-ins. During these check-ins, we'd talk about everything, our work, our relationship, our dreams, and even the things that were worrying us. It wasn't always easy to be so open, but the practice brought a new level of honesty and intentionality to our relationship. One evening, during one of these check-ins, James said something that stuck with me. "You know, I used to think our biggest accomplishment would be our careers," he said. "But now I think it's this, what we've built together." I smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. "I think so too," I said. A few months later, James's company offered him the chance to lead a new project, one that would require him to travel frequently. It was an incredible opportunity, but it also came with challenges, particularly for our relationship. "What do you think?" he asked one night as we discussed the offer. "I think it's an amazing opportunity for you," I said honestly. "But we need to figure out how to make it work for us." We spent hours brainstorming solutions, ways to stay connected during his trips, how to balance his travel schedule with our long-term goals, and how to ensure we both felt supported. In the end, we agreed that James would take the role, but we'd reassess in 6 months to make sure it was still the right decision for both of us. As James's travel schedule ramped up, we leaned even more heavily on the tools we developed over the past year. We scheduled regular video calls, sent each other thoughtful messages throughout the day, and made the most of the time we had together when he was home. It wasn't always easy, but it reinforced something we'd learned during the move, that challenges, no matter how big, could be overcome if we faced them together. As we approached our second anniversary in the new city, James and I started talking about what the next chapter of our lives might look like. "Do you think we'll stay here forever?" he asked one night as we sat on the balcony, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I do know that wherever we go, I want us to keep dreaming big." James smiled, reaching for my hand. "Me too," he said. The life we built in the new city wasn't perfect, but it was ours, shaped by the challenges we'd faced, the lessons we'd learned, and the love we'd chosen to nurture every step of the way. As we looked toward the future, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for James, but for the person I'd become because of him. Together, we were proof that even the hardest transitions could lead to something beautiful. By the time our second year in the new city drew to a close, the life James and I had created felt as natural as if it had always been this way. The doubts and fears that had accompanied our move had faded, replaced by a quiet confidence that we could face whatever challenges came our way. But as much as we'd grown, the journey was far from over. Life had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them, and our commitment to each other would continue to be tested in ways we couldn't yet foresee. One evening, as we sat together on the balcony, James turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about how much we've changed since we moved here?" he asked. "All the time," I said. "Sometimes I can't believe how scared I was to leave. It feels so far away now." "Me too," he said. "But I think those challenges made us stronger. We wouldn't be here without them." His words stayed with me, a reminder of how much growth could come from embracing the unknown. Not long after that conversation, James came home with an idea that would push us both out of our comfort zones. "There's a conference coming up in Paris," he said, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "My company wants me to go, and I was thinking, maybe you could come with me." "Paris?" I repeated, startled. "That's a big leap." "I know," he said, smiling. "But we've always talked about traveling more. This could be our chance to start." The idea was daunting, but the more we talked about it, the more it began to feel like the perfect way to mark the next chapter of our journey. Planning the trip became a shared project, one that brought out the best of our teamwork. James handled the logistics, booking flights and researching accommodations, while I dove into guidebooks and travel blogs, creating an itinerary that balanced his work commitments with time for us to explore the city together. As the departure date approached, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. It would be our first international trip, and while it was a chance to make new memories, it also felt like a test of how far we'd come. When we arrived in Paris, the city was everything I'd imagined and more. The streets were alive with the sounds of laughter and music, the smell of fresh baguettes wafting from corner bakeries. James's conference took up much of the first 2 days, but we made the most of the evenings, wandering through cobblestone streets and marveling at landmarks like the Eiffel Tower and Notre Dame. On the final day of the trip, we visited Montmartre, a neighborhood known for its artistic history and breathtaking views of the city. As we stood on a hill overlooking the skyline, James took my hand. "I'm glad we did this," he said. "It feels like a reminder of how far we've come." "Me too," I said, leaning into him. When we returned to the city, the experience of Paris stayed with us, not just as a collection of memories but as a symbol of our growth. It reminded us that while the journey wasn't always easy, it was always worth it. As we settled back into our routine, James and I began talking about what our next big adventure might be. "Do you think we'll ever move again?" he asked one night as we prepared dinner. "Maybe," I said. "But I don't think it would feel as scary now. We've proven we can handle change." James nodded, his smile warm. "No matter where we go, I just want us to keep growing together." "Me too," I said. On our second anniversary in the new city, James suggested we write letters to our future selves, a tradition we'd started in therapy but hadn't revisited in a while. In my letter, I reflected on everything we'd learned, the importance of communication, the power of compromise, and the strength that came from facing challenges together. When we sealed the letters in envelopes and tucked them into a drawer, I felt a sense of closure, and a sense of anticipation for what was yet to come. That evening, as we toasted to 2 years in the city, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, for the life we'd built, the love we'd nurtured, and the person I'd become because of it all. "We've come a long way," I said, raising my glass. "We have," James agreed. "And I can't wait to see where we go next." The life James and I had created wasn't perfect, but it was ours, built on a foundation of trust, resilience, and a shared commitment to growth. As we looked toward the future, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, one step at a time. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace.